Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Buckeye Weekly podcast. I am Tony Gerdeman here, as always, with Tom Orr. Tom, how are you doing today?
I am outstanding. I just, before we start talking about football, which I know we're talking a lot about football, I want to talk about one non-football sport, and only not one non-football sport. Shout out to the Ohio State men's tennis team for their National Indoor Championship this week. That's the only non-football sport we should talk about, other than maybe hockey, although hockey had a bad weekend too.
Here's a sport for you. Have you, Tom, have you ever locked your keys in your car?
I don't think I've locked them in my car before. I've done a whole bunch of dumb car-related stuff. I don't know if I've told this story in the podcast before, but the morning of the Michigan game last year, I got in the car at 7 in the morning or whatever to get there super early, and my car wouldn't start because the battery was dead, because we had been on vacation for like the whole week beforehand, gotten back the Friday night before, and I had neglected to check whether my car was going to start the next morning, and it didn't. So then I just barely made the Michigan game last year. That's my dumbest recent car misadventure. What about you?
Well, thanks for asking. I had never locked my keys in my car until this morning, and it makes you feel like a real idiot. And what happened, I had my phone in my hand and my keys in my hand, and I was getting into the car, and I accidentally hit the lock button on my key fob, because I heard it registered, like, oh, I locked the car. So then I have my door open, I start the car, I look at the windshield, I'm like, oh, I've got some scraping I need to do. So I grab the scraper, and I'm thinking to myself as I'm getting out, well, I better close the door so that the car can warm up inside. And of course I do close the door, and then I scrape, happy to scrape. And then I go to put the scraper away, and my door is locked. All the doors are locked. My phone is in the car. Fortunately, I'm at home, so I just go inside and get my wife's phone. And she's like, well, where's your spare set? Funny story, my spare set is also in the car. That's where I keep it a lot of times for winter usage. I can start the car and leave, set in there. So I'm thinking, well, now I gotta, do I call a locksmith? I don't know how to handle this. I've never done it before. So I walk inside. She's like, yeah, it's too bad you don't have AAA. And I'm thinking, a week ago, I went and re-upped my AAA for the first time in 6 years. So not that made me feel smart, it just made me feel fortunate. Then 35, 40 minutes later, they were over there, and the AAA guy's like, yeah, this happens to everybody. And, don't feel like an idiot. I'm thinking, I bet all the time these guys go back and they just tell stories about the idiots that they run into on the sides of the roads, at office parks, at homes. But anyway, shout out to AAA, and shout out to my wife for not just dragging me through the mud and making me feel like a real idiot and a real jerk today, because she totally could have.
Can we go back to the part of the story where you keep your spare set of keys also in the car? That seems like having one of those hide-a-key rocks for your house and hiding it inside your house. No, the entire point is that it's not inside the thing that you're trying to get into.
The reason is, and it's like the set, I don't have a house key on both sets, I just have it on one. So sometimes I'll keep the set in the car that I use to start the car and leave the car warming up during the winter. Then I have a spare set that I can use to lock the house up. So it's not entirely my fault, but it's...
As you were saying that, you reminded me of one of the dumbest things, literally one of the dumbest things I have ever done in my entire life, which was I was going on a business trip, and I have one of my car keys and one of my wife's car keys on my key ring. And so I had that with me, but I had also taken an extra set of keys and thrown it in my suitcase or whatever. So I had two sets, so I had a second set of keys in my suitcase or whatever, so that, if I lost my regular set of keys, I had another set of keys that I could drive the car home. What I neglected to realize was that her other car key was also on that. So I had both of our car keys. So when she tried to leave for work that morning, I had taken both sets of car keys, which was great. That was not a problem that AAA could solve. So I think the moral of the story, dear listener, is that you were listening to the Ohio State podcast hosted by the two dumbest people on earth. So you have that going for you.
I'll tell just one more, and then we can get started. But coming back from one of our trips, we get home at crazy hours. It was like 3 a.m. from a trip we've been gone for. Maybe it was Chicago. I don't know. Wouldn't have been that late. But anyway, I always put my house keys when I'm away. I put it in a certain pocket in my computer bag, same pocket every time. And so when I get home at like 3 a.m, I realized it's not in that pocket. And I was concerned that maybe I left the keys at home. So then now I can't call my wife because she leaves her phone off at night. So I have to pound on the door at like 3 a.m, get the dogs, now they're up. And it's just not an inviting welcome home when you're knocking on the door at 3 a.m. because you don't have your keys. But fortunately, I did find out the next morning that I actually did have my keys. I did not tell her that, though. But I think we need to do away with keys entirely and just do what Ohio State does with the biometrics. That would be better.
Didn't we have some misadventure with the remote key fobs on one of our trips at some point? Or was that just a story I had heard? Where someone had like gotten in the car with the key fob or walked out of the car with the key fob or something.
That was Jim Davidson, our photographer, locking his camera equipment, and this was out in Arizona. So it was Patrick Murphy who was with us at the time. He's now with 24/7, and Jim Davidson out, and it was the Clemson. Was it the Clemson game or? No, I was at that one. So one of those games out there, and in their rental car at the hotel, they ended up parking next to a rental car that looks exactly, it's the same exact car as theirs. So Davidson then takes his camera equipment out to the car and puts it, I guess, in the trunk, and then locks the car. And it turns out that he put his stuff in the wrong car, and it was a stranger's car. And I don't think they were parked next to each other. I think he just had the directions wrong on where the car was. So he ends up putting thousands of dollars worth of camera equipment in the wrong car, and then has to wait for the police and all of that. And meanwhile, all Patrick wants to do is get to the media party, because it was the same night as the media party time, and you can't miss the media party. So yeah. Tons of adventures and mostly misadventures on with this job, but that's a legendary story that Jim probably doesn't want out there.
I guess we'll find out if Jim listens to the podcast.
All right. Anyway, so the next 2 weeks of this show basically will be an offensive preview, spring preview, and a defensive spring preview, because after that, spring football starts. So 3 shows from now, we're going to be talking about that first day of spring football. And Tom, what I wanted to ask you initially is what your expectations are for access this season. Because normally people, just understand, as we've mentioned before, even for spring practice, we might get the first 3 periods. We might get maybe 45 total minutes of access, which is mostly stretching, some light jogging, and then maybe position drills or 2, never really seeing any scrimmage or anything like that. So I'm wondering, are you as last week and weeks before we have talked about the new dawning of this Ryan Day era, which we both are in favor of, do you think we will become even more in favor of next month?
Well, the first year of a new coach is typically a little more open than it is later in a coach's tenure. That was true. I covered the team during Jim Tressel's first year, and we had pretty unfettered access to practice. That would have been 2001. And so we got to go into practice at least once a week and watch and videotape. And it was like, yeah, you can go up to about the 50-yard line, but don't go across that 50 or whatever. And then as Tressel was there longer and longer, that access kind of dwindled and dwindled, especially after he won a national championship. It was like, all right, well, now everyone's interested. We don't really need you guys as much anymore. And so the access kind of dwindled. I don't know. I did not cover the first year of Urban Meyer. Were you there in 2012? Did things kind of open up a little bit under Meyer's first year?
We've had full practices before in the spring. I don't know if we've ever had it in the fall, but until the last few years, we would also have that full Student Appreciation Day. Now that's gone because of, I guess, construction at the WAC, I believe, is the reasoning or the excuse there. So there have been some full practices in the spring, but I mean, I don't recall a spring practice under Meyer, a full spring practice in the last few years.
Not in the last few years. Last year we had a few where we got to shoot pictures and video of the first 15 or 20 minutes or so, and then got to watch for maybe an hour. And it feels like there were maybe 2 of those last year, but that was about it. And then we did not get our normal fall camp access because there was the whole Zach Smith thing going on, and so fall camp was pretty locked down. So we had a lot, even if we have a kind of quote unquote normal level of access this year, it's going to feel like a crazy opening of the gates. Although I wrote last week a piece about the last Buckeye to come to Ohio State from each state, and doing that involved going back through a lot of old media guides and rosters and stuff. And while I was doing that, I found the media access policy from 1990. This is right in the Ohio State 1990 media guide. If you go back through my tweets, I tweeted it out about a week ago. Covering practice, I'm just going to read it verbatim. Ohio State's practices are open to the media. Once school starts, the team normally will take the field around 3:15 p.m. For your own safety, you are urged to stay back off the playing field when practice is in session. All practices will be held at the Woody Hayes Athletic Center. Coach Cooper usually is available for interviews both before and after practice. So basically, the media policy in 1990 was, okay, try not to actually go out and play quarterback during practice, just for your safety. That was basically the media policy. So if we could go back to that would be great.
And back then, there were probably some members of the media who could have played quarterback as well as what John Cooper had.
Kirk Herbstreit was one of those quarterbacks, and a couple of years later, he was one of those media members. So, I mean, really, it was, I think both sides could have done the others equally well, I think is the takeaway there.
So let's stick with quarterbacks, and we'll just start there. And we had a bunch of listener questions, so I've incorporated those into what we're going to talk about position by position. The first one comes from @ZippyFish. Do you think Ryan Day would prefer to name a starting quarterback by the end of the spring, or would he like the competition to go into fall camp? And I think, Tom, you would like to know who that guy is. There's a danger in naming him, though, as we saw last year with Joe Burrow deciding to transfer to LSU. But I also think, in talking to Matthew Baldwin, who I don't know, maybe 96% of Buckeye fans expect him to be the backup this year. This is a guy who could have transferred in high school to a place and gone to be a starter, but he wanted to be the starter at Lake Travis in Texas and Austin. And that didn't happen until his senior season. And when I talked to him after the Rose Bowl, I'm like, "Are you tired of waiting?" He's like, "No, I'm a patient guy. I would rather be on the field than off." But I do wonder, Tom, and if there is some part of him where you're looking at this, what Ryan Day does with quarterbacks, and even if he is the backup, and you're seeing Justin Fields just be outstanding and looking like the next NFL guy in 2 years, he might be in a situation where he's like, you know what? If I just wait, then I can be that guy. A redshirt junior, I'll be starting. Redshirt senior will be my second year starting. And maybe then I can be an NFL guy as well. So I wonder if there's the same kind of danger in naming a starter this spring as there was last year. So do you think do you think Day wants to be able to name a starter? And if he wants to, will he? I mean, if he can, will he?
I don't think they're going to name a starter coming out of spring ball. I think they're going to take it into fall camp because, I mean, there are the concerns that you talked about with, potentially having someone transfer if they're not named the starter, that kind of thing. But I think maybe the bigger concern is assuming it is Justin Fields who is the front runner coming out of spring ball. He's only had a couple months and 15 practices at that point to start picking up this offense. And he's obviously not going to be game ready coming out of spring. So I don't know if they're going to be willing to completely crown him because he's not going to be anything close to a finished product at that point. I think they may come out of spring practice with the idea that assuming he keeps progressing the way he has, and assuming he picks up the offense at the speed at which they're hoping he picks up the offense this spring, in that case, then he would be the starter coming into the for the season opener. I think that's a reasonable expectation. I don't think they're going to name someone coming out of spring because I don't think they're going to have someone they have 100% confidence in at that point. This is not like, JT Barrett 2 years ago where, of course, JT Barrett's going to be the starter because JT Barrett has the best grasp of the offense at this point and, has demonstrated that he can do it. You're not going to have someone who's at that level, I don't think. So I don't expect them to name a starter, although I have a feeling coming out of spring ball, there's a decent chance we will know who the front runner is, but I don't think they're going to have this guy is absolutely the starter and, write it in stone.
I also don't think that they will have been given maybe enough of the offense to even have a starter at that point, because you're only going to be giving them, like, what good is having a number one guy with 60% of the offense when there's still so much more to go? And so you might have an idea, but you won't know it until the rest of the offense is out there, and that's going to incorporate fall camp as well. You'll have more information. I would be pretty surprised if a starter would be named afterwards. Yeah, they'd love for Justin Fields to pick everything up and be outstanding, or Matthew Baldwin to be outstanding. That would be great for them. But there's not enough, like, naming them a starter at this point with just a fraction of the offense in is pointless because you don't even have all of the information yet. So I'm thinking, like, if one guy was going to be named the starter, would Matthew Baldwin be the most likely, given that he knows the offense the best? But can they even... do they have to slow things down to let Justin Fields catch up with them, or do you think that's going on right now? And then once they're out on the practice field, they're like, okay, well, this is where we're starting at, and Justin, you have to catch up with us.
I mean, I think they're probably going to have something like that where it's you have to catch up with us, but I also don't think at the end of 15 practices, I don't think they're going to be willing to just completely write Fields off if he's not completely caught up at that point. Because, again, you have, even coming out of spring ball, you can't practice with the full team, but you're going to have a lot of time in the film room. You're going to have a lot of time just studying the playbook. You're going to have a lot of time throwing with receivers in May, June, July, before fall camp opens. There's no way they're going to just completely write off Justin Fields coming out of spring ball. I don't think that's really likely at all. The other element of this is if you name a starter, a clear-cut starter coming out of spring ball, does that discourage potential grad transfers for coming in? Because then you're coming in knowing you're not going to be the starter. If the quarterback competition is at least theoretically open coming out of spring, then a grad transfer coming in can at least theoretically win the job. I think that, I don't know how realistic it is for a grad transfer to come in and think he's going to beat out the 5-star quarterback Justin Fields and the 4-star quarterback who's been here a year and a half and, knows the playbook really well in Matthew Baldwin. I don't know how realistic that is for someone to really think that, but it's at least a theoretical possibility, and it might make it an easier sell if they're looking to add a grad transfer if the job is at least theoretically open.
What would make the easiest sell is for you've got Matthew Baldwin and Justin Fields competing all spring. Then at the end of the spring, Ryan Day names Chugs as the starter. And now you'll have all kinds of quarterbacks thinking, well, I can beat out Chugs. I can beat him out. I mean, He wasn't even good enough to start at West Virginia. And, and if those guys, if Justin Fields and Matthew Baldwin can't beat him out, then I know I can't. So I'm going to be the starter at Ohio State. And now they've just landed, like two guys who are, like better than Shea Patterson. So I think you're right, Tom. I do think this is a plan, fiendishly clever in its intricacies, as Homer Simpson would say.
Better than Shea Patterson? Sir, Pro Football Focus would like to have a word with you about the Big Ten's finest quarterback. I mean, that's a really good plan right up until the moment that Justin Fields and Matthew Baldwin both transfer after the spring, and then you need to bring in 3 grad transfer quarterbacks. I mean, I'm not saying it's the worst plan I've ever heard, but that would be the locking your keys in the car of quarterback decisions, I think.
Trust me, I think much less of myself now than I did even 24 hours ago. So when I'm coming up with ideas like this, I know who's coming up with these ideas, and I understand where I'm coming from. When you're looking at Baldwin and Fields, is there anything? There are things that Justin Fields can do that Matthew Baldwin can't. Matthew Baldwin can't run a 4.52, and Justin Fields is a much better runner. Baldwin can run and is fine with running and is okay doing that. Better runner than Dwayne Haskins. But is there anything that Matthew Baldwin can do this spring or even into the fall? I mean, this is a spring preview, so we'll try to keep it to the spring, but is there anything that Baldwin can do that Fields can't that gives him an advantage? We know he knows the offense better, but Fields you would think would eventually catch up. And then when they're even, are they even?
That's a good question. I think that there's a decent chance that Baldwin, I mean, you mentioned knowing the playbook better, and potentially he will have better success reading defenses and not making mistakes and that kind of thing throughout the spring, just because he's not going to have to be thinking about 6 other things. He can just focus on reading the defense. So from that perspective, he may look a lot better this spring. Beyond that, we haven't seen Fields throw in person. We haven't seen Baldwin throw a meaningful pass in person, and we basically haven't seen him play even in a scrimmage at this point. You and I haven't, just because he didn't play in spring ball last year. We didn't see fall camp, and he didn't play in any games last year. So it's theoretically possible that Baldwin has a better arm than Fields, but I think we're going to have a much better sense for how they stack up in that department and accuracy in a couple weeks when we actually get to see him throw in person.
And then when people do watch the spring game, and if Matthew Baldwin does look better at that time than Justin Fields, don't get too, I guess, influenced by that. Because if you look back at last year's spring game, Joe Burrow completed 15 of 22 passes for 238 yards and 2 touchdowns. Dwayne Haskins completed 9 of 19 for 120 yards and 2 touchdowns. So Joe Burrow had the better game that day. And you know how much people like to make conclusions from the spring game, because for most people, that's all they've seen. And that's the most that they've seen. So you're going to use that as your base of information and knowledge. But, I think last year we could probably make more of that because Haskins and Burrow were on a more even footing because they had been in the program longer. If Fields has a 9 for 22 game and Baldwin is like 20 for 26, I don't really know that you shouldn't get too up or down about that, because that's going to be Justin Fields' 15th practice in Ryan Day's offense. So you should expect some struggles. Now, if he ends up lighting it up, Tom, you've got to be really worried about the Ohio State defense. It's over.
That's the nice thing about the spring game. There's always something to complain about.
And so tickets go on sale.
Yeah, tickets go on sale Friday, $5 a piece, $15 if you want the fancy club seats. That's 10 a.m. on Friday is the on-sale date. There's an article on the front page of theozone.net if you'd like to read all about it. If Baldwin looks better than Fields, that might be a too soon to tell thing. if Fields looks markedly better than Baldwin, there's probably more to take away from that. If Fields is already ahead of where Baldwin is after just 15 practices, that's probably something that you could put a little more stock into than if it's the other way around.
Honestly, Baldwin should look better this spring because it's going to be his second spring. It's going to be the most opportunities, the most reps he's had. He's the most familiar with it. So if you're the most familiar person, with anything, be it at your job or at AAA, you're a better unlocker of idiots in their cars than the other guy. You've been doing it longer, so yeah, you're going to look better doing it. We'll see then if you remember last year at center with Josh Myers and Brady Taylor. Brady Taylor was the guy at the beginning, and then Josh Myers the last 2 weeks of camp just crushed it and caught back up, and maybe we'll see that at quarterback. It wouldn't surprise me. Spring football is a little odd as well. You've got, I believe they're going to be doing it the same way. It's 1 week of spring football, and then you're on spring break for a week, and then you come back for football like 2 weeks later. So you go 2 weeks basically, or 12 days without practices. So there's a lull in between, and then you pick back up and you got to get back into the flow of things. Can you make up ground where it needs to be? I don't think, from the people who have watched Justin Fields in high school, they seem to have no doubts about him. The people who have watched Matthew Baldwin in high school and also his teammates who have watched him at Ohio State say, doubt him at your own peril, which is why, Tom, we need Ryan Day to keep practices as open as possible so that we can let the media know whether or not Ryan Day has made the incorrect choice when he finally makes it.
If he cares at all about his players and wants them represented in a true and fair light, I think really it's the only possible solution. And look, I want to be reasonable about this. We are not expecting to get a chance to actually play quarterback in ourselves during practice. Like I'm fully willing to attend practice on those 1990 rules. I think that's a very fair compromise between what we would want, which is actually to be playing football during practice, and what they would want, which is to lock us in a dark room and never let us see anything ever. So I think that's a pretty fair middle ground.
I think, just to be sure, on that first practice, I will be bringing in a black no contact jersey for myself, just to cover all my bases.
I will compromise. I'll be in an orange limited contact jersey. So David Perkins isn't still around to like drill people who are not actually football players, right? He's gone. Okay, good.
No, he's gone, unless he is now Brutus, in which case he's probably looking for some revenge somehow. I don't know. So that's quarterback, and that's the one that everybody wants to talk about, and it'll be the fun one to watch. That's not the only position battle, and there's others that we'll get to, but where there is not a position battle is running back. And I don't want to say there should be, but I do want to say, based on his performance last year, J.K. Dobbins rushing for 1,000 yards, but needing more carries than any Ohio State running back should to get there, there should be more of a competition there this spring. He's not a 2,000 rep club guy just yet. He's probably close to it in terms of, he's been here for 2 springs now and he's seen a lot. So you don't need to work him as much as you do Master Teague and DeMario McCall and the true freshman Marcus Crowley. But I think and I do expect things to be better with this offensive line and a quarterback who is willing to run, and that'll open up the read option and make things more difficult for a defense to just target J.K. Dobbins. But I think they need to make sure that he doesn't feel comfortable in his situation. I think they need to let him know that his carries are up for grabs, and he's always been a hard worker, and he's one of those, as Urban Meyer would say, one of those elite guys. So I don't think he'll ever get full of himself, but I don't think it would hurt to let him know, like, you want 25 carries, you want 20 carries a game, but if you're going to average 4.6 yards a carry, you're not going to get him.
Yeah, that was a real steep decline from him from his freshman year to his sophomore year. He went from 7.2 yards per carry as a freshman to 4.6 as a sophomore. And just to put that into perspective, because yards per carry is kind of something that people don't necessarily think of if you think of just a more traditional rushes and yards. He had 46 more carries as a sophomore, 46 more, and 350 fewer yards. That's not good. That's not good at all. So there is a whole lot of that you can probably chalk up to the offensive line and the coaches not necessarily calling plays that fit the strengths of their team at times, especially in the running game last year. But he needs a bounce back year, because it seemed like there were times that he got caught from behind when you were not thinking. He doesn't seem like someone who should get caught from behind. Mm-hmm. And it seemed like he got caught from behind a few times that it was like, really? He should have been gone on that one. So I think he has something to prove. He has not, I don't think, come out and said this, but it would be pretty surprising if he was not entering this year thinking this is going to be my last year at Ohio State. Because we've talked about running backs before. There's only so much tread left on those tires, and running backs do not typically have long NFL careers. You don't see a lot of 15-year NFL running backs. So if you are going to get drafted reasonably high after 3 years, go get paid. So I would assume that that's the mindset he's coming into his junior year with. So if that's true, he's going to have to, he really has something to prove this year. This is a contract year for him if that's the case. And so you wouldn't think that focus would be an issue with that being the case.
And he will have more carries under him than most third-year running backs as a 3-year starter. So you're looking at, 600 rushes in his career, and yeah, you'll want to get. He's thinking of himself as a 3-year player. I don't know if he said it, but that's what most of the skill position players at Ohio State view themselves as. And given what he's done in his first 2 years, there's no reason he wouldn't also be thinking that. One of the things, Tony Alford, you remember the end of the 2017 season, J.K. Dobbins was caught from behind a couple of times then, and Tony Alford chalked it up to just fatigue of the season because he had a lot of carries, and that's going to happen. And then there are maybe one 40-yard carry, maybe no 40-yard carries for him this past season, which, you don't expect that from him after what we saw his freshman year. And I know some people, like some of the guys on the forum, think he bulked up too much. He looked different. It wasn't nearly as explosive. I think some of it was him. I think most of it was the offense, because we saw such a dynamic player as a freshman. It's just such a drop-off last year. And if this is who he is compared to, like if 2018 is who he really is, then they're going to need serious help from Master Teague and Marcus Crowley and Demario McCall, which takes me to Master Teague, who did he get to redshirt last year? I've got the roster right here, but he obviously didn't play much. This is going to be an opportunity for him to get quite a few carries. Yeah, he did redshirt, didn't play enough games. So he's going to get a lot of reps this spring, and we'll see, because he's one of those combine guys, where he's got the time listed in this piece of paper, 4.33 at OSU or whatever, 4.30 at OSU. You could scoff at that, but even if it's 4.3 at OSU, that's still fast, at the NFL Combine in terms of what it translates to. It's fast. So maybe he's going to be, maybe his explosiveness can get him on the field more. He looked really good in the spring game last year, and when we got to see him in times in the spring, he would flash. I'm expecting even more from him this year. He's one of the guys I'm actually looking forward to watching most. Where are you on Master Teague, Tom?
Of all the guys who are kind of first-year projected significant contributors, he's right up there for me. Because he's a speed guy, but he's also built pretty solidly. He's not like a little Mo Wells scatback type. Like he can run between the tackles too. And there are going to be carries this year. Even if Justin Fields is running and, so then the quarterback is taking some of the carries, okay. Dobbins is not a 30 carry a game running back. And he's probably not, they probably don't even want him to be a 25 carry a game running back. So there are going to be minimally 5 to 10 carries for a backup running back on this team throughout the course of the year. And, if you give Master Teague, say, 75, 100 carries during the course of the year, I think he could put up a 600-yard season. I don't think that that's outrageous at all, because he's got the speed to break a long one or two, and kind of pad the yards per carry numbers that way. And he's the kind of guy who they will probably have playing in the second halves of games when you've maybe got the other team worn down a little bit, and there are opportunities to rip off 15 and 20-yard carries. And just the little bit we saw out of him last year was, okay, he's not going to get to play a whole lot in 2018 because Dobbins and Weber are both here, but when he has an opportunity, he showed you, I think, what you were looking to see last spring to kind of get you intrigued about what he could be in the future.
Yeah, I do wonder. I get this feeling that DeMario McCall is going to be in the backfield more than in the slot, but that might change based on what Master Teague does this spring. If they find out that, they're very confident in what he can do and he shows them what he needs to show them, maybe that changes their plans with McCall. But I also think DeMario McCall is one of the most explosive players on offense. He may be the most explosive player on offense, so we'll see him more in line with what a Curtis Samuel was at H than what Paris Campbell was or what KJ Hill is. And remember, even Curtis Samuel caught maybe 79 passes, 69 passes, 74 passes, something like that in 2017 or 16, whatever it was. But, he was a guy who ran the ball 100 times as well. Maybe I don't think McCall's going to run it that much. But I could see maybe even like a 50-50 split on his time in the backfield and his time in the slot. But, with Teague, with McCall, even if you're not getting the explosion out of Dobbins, which I think you will, those two guys should give you enough of that, or not enough. They'll give you some of that when they're doing their things, because whoever that second running back is, even if it's Teague in addition to McCall, they're going to get reps in the first half because, when you're running the up-tempo stuff, you can't just keep J.K. Dobbins out there. You're going to have to bring other guys in and get them work, just like they did with Mike Weber. And, I expect Dobbins to get more carries maybe than he did last year, or to be more involved. Although, Tom, he won't need as many carries, I don't think, next year, or we'll say this year, as he got last year, because he's going to be doing more with them. So I don't know really what to expect in terms of carries. I would think for Dobbins, 1,400 yards would be in the ballpark of where I am with him. You said Master Teague 600. I think if he gets that 80 to 100 carries, I think that's a given, because I do expect some big runs from him. But in terms of the spring, where you've got McCall, you've got Teague, you've got J.K. Dobbins, where do you find room for Marcus Crowley in all of this? The true freshman who they really like. They has enrolled early. They found him late, basically, and arguably the best player in the state of Florida based on the accolades and the awards that he received. But it's going to be hard to get him snaps when you've got the other three guys there, especially if McCall is in the backfield as much as I expect. But it's going to be easier than it would have been if Brian Snead was still around. So I think they'll be able to find enough for Crowley to see where he is, where he stands. What are you expecting from him? Because, talking to him, he's like, yeah, I'm a bigger back. I run tough. And I agree with the tough stuff, but he doesn't look like a bigger back. Like, we'll see what he looks like with pads and with his uniform on. Master Teague was like 5'11", 215 listed. When he's out there, he looks bigger than that. I don't know if it's just the way he's shaped, but he looks bigger than that. Where Crowley, you said he's at like 203 or something like that, 205. He looks more like 190, 195, and we'll see what he looks like in pads. But, what are you expecting from him this spring?
He's going to be just a function of what kind of opportunities does he get? How many carries can he really get? Because he is, if they are running McCall at running back, at least 50-50 split with H, then Crowley's the fourth running back. And how many carries is the fourth running back really going to get in practice? How many opportunities is he really going to get in practice? I'm sure that they want to get him work and they want to see what he can do. But I think there's going to be a limited number of opportunities for him this spring, and how quickly can he pick things up? How quickly is he going to get, be ready to contribute? How quickly is he going to show that he deserves more carries, that maybe deserves to move up in that pecking order? I think that's a big ask to have him behind three veteran running backs and expect a ton out of him this spring. You may see some out of him. I mean, the spring game is never great for running backs. That's never a real running back showcase, it seems like, in the spring game. So I think come in, temper your expectations for him a little bit. Not that he couldn't contribute, because he does. I mean, he's not huge. He's not. I had the same reaction that you did, just from the kind of initial meet the new freshman press availabilities last year versus this year. I remember looking at Teague and kind of going, whoa, that guy, I mean, he looks just very solidly built. And, Crowley is from Florida, so he's bundled up, so you can't really tell. It wasn't like he was in a dry fit t-shirt or something where you could really tell. But Teague, just last year, you kind of looked at it and just kind of went, whoa. And and Brian Snead was kind of the same way last year. And I didn't have that reaction with Crowley, but I would not read too much into it if you don't see or hear a lot from Crowley this spring, because it is kind of an uphill battle to get a meaningful amount of snaps and try and do something with them this early in your career.
You mentioned uphill battles, which takes us to the wide receivers, where Brian Hartline will be replacing Johnny Dixon and Terry McLaurin and Paris Campbell. And so one of the questions that we have here is this year a bigger test for Brian Hartline as a coach? Last year, he had a ton of returning talent that was expected to be improved in the post-JT Barrett era. This year, he loses 3 NFL guys, will have a new quarterback, and is no longer not Zach Smith. So, yeah, I was thinking about this yesterday or something like that maybe we're not talking enough about losing Terry McLaurin, losing Paris Campbell, who can take essentially a handoff against the University of Michigan and beat everybody to the sideline. And it's like, that's what he does. Well, he's one of the few in football who can, and now you don't have him anymore. You've got Terry McLaurin, who's like Evan Spencer, who just does everything you want. And then you've got McLaurin was actually productive in terms of catches and numbers. Evan Spencer had like 9 or 14 catches in 2014 and really wasn't overly involved that way. But what McLaurin did, as a leader, as a blocker, as a special teams guy, as a guy who caught nearly a dozen touchdowns. I mean, that's a lot to lose. Johnny Dixon, obviously, the explosion that he has, and there's a lot of reason to believe that, this is obviously a much bigger test for Brian Hartline, because last year the answers, it was like an open book test for Brian Hartline because he had veterans. And now he still has some veterans, but he's got to bring everybody up to that level. And, with McLaurin and Campbell, early on, it was recognized in them that they would be able to lead the room. Those guys are gone, so it's going to be a more difficult way to lead, or harder to lead the room for, I think, Brian Hartline, because those guys aren't there now. Did they leave enough of themselves behind? I think you always have that. But yeah, Tom, this is going to be a much bigger test, and it's one where you're no longer grading on a curve. This is going to be like a real, people are going to be watching. And if they're as good as they were last year, then like, yeah, this Brian Hartline is as good as we think he is.
I think that there's a lot of the stuff that you mentioned with the off field and the leadership and that kind of stuff. A lot of that is probably kind of at least mitigated a little bit with the return of KJ Hill. Having him back gives you a senior leader in that room who has a multi-year history of producing and being he has been right with the Paris Campbell, Terry McLaurin, Johnny Dixon group for basically his whole career. And so he is in a position to kind of take care of some of that leadership vacuum that's in that room right now. As for the on-field production, the guys at X are going to be the same as last year. It's Austin Mack and Ben Victor back. The guys at H are largely the same. You don't have Paris Campbell, but you have KJ Hill, you've got CJ Saunders, you've got DeMario McCall for whatever split of that time he has. You got Jalen Gill there. The question is at X, where you're replacing Dixon, you're replacing Johnny Dixon and Terry McLaurin. That's kind of the position to watch. That's I think where you're going to see how is Brian Hartline as a coach, because that's all guys who have only played for him. It's Cameron Babb, it's Garrett Wilson, and it's Chris Olave. And those are all young guys. They're all extremely talented guys. The raw material is there for him to turn that Z position into something pretty special this year. I think that's going to be where watch that wide receiver position in particular. That's going to tell you how good a job Brian Hartline is doing. I mean, this question was from at burner account 69. He said this year he lost 3 NFL guys, will have a new quarterback, and is no longer, quote, not Zach Smith. I mean, he's still not Zach Smith. So Hartline's already coming into the year with there is already a significant upgrade from a couple years ago. And even if this is not a 5,000-yard passing offense this year, you still have the talent out there to do some pretty spectacular things, I think, this year.
Chris Olave, I think expectations are obviously high for him. You're mentioning Brian Hartline not being Zach Smith. I was wondering, has there been an outside receiver that has been able to produce as a freshman, that was able to produce as a freshman for Zach Smith? I know, like Dontre Wilson did well at H as a true freshman, but that was as much Urban Meyer slamming him into that peg into that hole to get him out there on the field because they needed explosion. But really, like McLaurin and Paris Campbell didn't do anything for 2 years. Austin Mack had a couple of catches as a true freshman. Same with Benjamin Victor. KJ Hill redshirted. All of those, the Campbell and those guys redshirted as well.
Go back to Michael Thomas. Michael Thomas didn't do anything his first couple of years. I mean,
he caught like 3 passes as a true freshman, then redshirted.
Yeah, Devin Smith didn't do anything in his early in his career. That was a pretty consistent theme. So Olave was really a historical anomaly, and whether that anomaly is because of Brian Hartline or because of Chris Olave, they're both back this year. So that should bode pretty well for him this year.
I'll be interested to see what Cameron Babb, how healthy he is. Can he go? I know he's been running around and catching footballs, for a while. So hopefully he's good to go this spring and we can see what he is capable of. See how Garrett Wilson does, who I know we're both very high on. And, it might not happen immediately for him, but if it's going to happen immediately for anybody, any of the freshmen, it's probably that guy. So there will be plays. When the Ohio State football Twitter account tweets out highlights of spring practice, there's going to be a couple with Garrett Wilson. Just prepare yourself for that. And then, of course, we'll write about it. We'll tweet it and post it. You can get hyped up for Garrett Wilson as the next big thing. And then when he only catches 16 passes this year, you can complain to us about it, and that's fine. That's what we're here for. One of the other questions that at burner account 69 had, and I don't quite understand this, Tom. Maybe you do. And it says, if you apply the theory that you want a quote-unquote basketball team at the wide receiver position, how is the squad looking? He thinks that they have depth at the point and lots of potential along the front line, but might be weak on the wings. Now, is the point guard the H's and is the front line the X's, which would make sense because they're bigger? And
yeah, that's how I took it. Yeah.
Okay. And so that's basically what we've talked about, where you know what you've got at the X's. You think KJ Hill is, I think, 50 receptions away from being the all-time receptions leader at Ohio State. You talk to Brian Hartline for more than 2 minutes, and he's going to say, why haven't you brought up C.J. Saunders' name yet? So that tells you what he thinks about C.J. Saunders. I already said DeMario McCall might be the most explosive player on offense, and then I think Jalen Gill, to me, is like Paris Campbell 2.0, but like Campbell, it might take a little bit of time. I think he's further ahead than Campbell, and we'll see some of that this year. So there's plenty of answers at X, or plenty of options. But even though we don't know much about the Z's, Tom, I don't know if there's a more explosive or more potential at any position more than there is at Z. And I know what we're talking about at X, or at H. But I think with Chris Olave and Cameron Babb from what he was in high school, and Garrett Wilson from what he was in high school, that position to me is as talented, potentially, the talent is there with any of the other positions. Potentially, I think it could be more explosive than any of the other positions. And we'll see how much the H, like, is it still going to be the focal point of the offense like it was under Urban Meyer? But I think Z is unproven. But man, I really like each of those guys, and I think they'll be just fine.
I don't view Z as a concern because I think Olave comes in as a little bit more of a known quantity this year than he was. If Olave had not had the last half of 2018 that he did, that would be an all potential, no production,
right,
kind of black box. And I don't think that's what it is. That's, you have half of a season where Olave did what he did, and you can say, okay, well, there were lots of other guys. People were too focused on Paris Campbell and whoever else and that's why he was getting open. But you still can't. I mean, that still ignores the fact that was his true freshman year. He was doing that. He caught 2 touchdowns in the first half against Michigan as a true freshman, and that has been wide receiver. We've talked about this a ton of times. Wide receiver is a very difficult place to get on the field and contribute as a true freshman. So for him to do that as a true freshman, you can put whatever asterisks on it you want. He is in a position where, as long as he doesn't get complacent and he continues to improve his game, he can really take a big leap between his first year and his second year. To me, if you're going to worry about one of the positions, I think X is kind of the question mark, just because Ben Victor has been extremely inconsistent throughout his career. He has made huge plays, and then he just seems like he disappears for stretches during games. Austin Mack has had injury issues a couple times, and it's that's maybe a coincidence. It wasn't, it's not like consistent hamstring problems or consistent hand problems or whatever. But he's gotten banged up a few times in his career. He's been okay when he's been on the field, but banged up and missed a decent amount of time. That's kind of the position where it's still a little bit of show me, because those are guys who have played. This is not, complete unknowns. These are guys who have played and have not produced quite to the level that I think people might have expected out of them. Ben Victor is just so easy to look at and dream on and think, oh man, with that size, he could catch 15, 18 touchdown passes in a year. And he has made some huge plays in his career, but it hasn't been consistent. The consistency has just not been there with him. So that, if anything, that is the spot where I think it's a little bit of a show me year.
You mentioned Ben Victor, and I'm reminded of that Penn State game, experiencing that touchdown from Victor, the catch and run touchdown from the tunnel, not being able to see who was making this play, but just hearing that something was being made. And you see these refs, I could only see the refs in the end zone, like backing into the end zone, then running out of the end zone, then backing back into the end zone as the players came. And I can tell you the one receiver that I would not have expected it to be, after hearing all of this crowd and what seemed like to be taking forever, I would not have expected Benjamin Victor to be the guy running into the end zone on that. That's something you would expect from any of the other receivers that get into that rotation. But Victor, you think of the red zone weapon, or just moving the chains. You don't think of the catch and the run and dodging people and stiff arming. And maybe that gives you a glimpse of what he can do. And so when you only see it once a year, you're like, gosh, you want more. Another guy you want to see more from is Jalen Harris, who will be a junior this year and really has not been able to do much in terms of playing time, catches. Brian Hartline says he's still very high on Jalen Harris. And I had an interesting conversation with Hartline about him back at the Rose Bowl, and I asked him, like, do you have to keep him motivated knowing that he might not be playing because of the guys in front of him? And Hartline was like, I shouldn't have to, because if he's not playing, then he should be motivated to want to play. And that should motivate you to work harder. And so, yeah, he's obviously, Hartline is still motivating him and getting him to get into this position to play. And he expects him to play. And he told him that, he won't have a problem telling Victor or Mac to sit in favor of Jalen Harris if Jalen Harris is the guy who needs to play. And so, that's a guy. I still think it's too early for Blue Smith because that position is so deep. We don't even really know where Elijah Gardner plays yet because we haven't gotten to see a portion of practice that would give us any of that. So, he's like a 6'3" guy, so he has the kind of the frame, the height that you would expect at X, but is a fast guy, so maybe he's a Z. Don't really know. And when he's still got a lot of work to do, but he's been a guy who has been mentioned as somebody who is coming along. So I think I think we mentioned last week, the week before, where usually there's 6 guys. I think there's more this year, and it's going to be difficult for Hartline to, I guess, either narrow it down or find enough snaps for everybody. But I guess that's the kind of problem that every receivers coach in the nation would like.
Right. I mean, if you're just looking at X and Jalen Harris is your number 3X, he's 6'5". He can run. He can jump. I mean, that's someone that if you put Jalen Harris on, I don't know, pick a Minnesota or Indiana or something like that, he is someone who probably is playing as a freshman, starring and starting as a sophomore, and who is someone that Ohio State fans are screaming, how did you let this guy get out of state? And at Ohio State, he had 2 catches in his freshman year and 2 catches in his sophomore year. So the opportunity is there for him because, I mean, like I just talked about, neither Mac nor Victor has just really established themselves as a all Big Ten caliber player yet. Like if Jalen Harris makes a leap this spring, the opportunity is there. I talked to Jalen Harris after the Rose Bowl. The locker room, just for people who don't know, the way it works after the Big Ten championship game, after the Rose Bowl, they just kind of open the locker room and you can go talk to anyone you want. So we basically divided it up and tried to just get as many people who we hadn't talked to all year to get a chance to talk to them. And it's just kind of organized chaos, and you don't really have a plan other than get as many people as you can and talk to them for a little bit about their season and where they're coming into the next year. And when I was talking to Jalen Harris, I started asking him, so there's an opportunity next year because you got all these wide receivers leaving. And as I'm asking the question, I'm kind of running through the depth chart in my head and going, oh no, none of them play your position. Oh crap. And so I sort of changed the question midstream. So I think you listened to you might have listened to the audio. You can like hear me midstream go, the leadership perspective. So, I mean, there's so many openings in that wide receiver room with all the senior guys who left, but there's an opportunity for him there, but it's not as wide open as it is for Chris Olave or Cameron Babb or Garrett Wilson, where like all the Z's are gone, so it's a wide open depth chart. And at H, where there's clearly a lot more snaps now that Paris Campbell's not there. That's not the case at X. So the opportunity is there if Jalen Harris can earn it, but that's not a guarantee. And Elijah Gardner hasn't caught a pass yet in his career, so it's probably getting late early for him. You know, this is the end of his redshirt freshman year. He's going into his redshirt sophomore year. You probably have to be ready to make a move at some point, because they are still recruiting good wide receivers. And if you look at the 2020 class, they've got a whole bunch of real talented wide receivers that they're in on. So it's not going to get easier to get on the field. And if you've been here a couple of years, this is the time when you really have to start putting it all together and making a move. If you want to have a chance to see the field in any kind of meaningful way. This is, of all the people who, you know, if you were to make a list of who is this the biggest spring for, Elijah Gardner and Jalen Harris are probably somewhere on that list.
Another question from @Burdick003 on Twitter. How do you see the coaches using Jalen Gill if KJ Hill and Demario McCall are going to see the most reps at H-back? And for me, I think it goes back to one of the reasons why I think McCall will be at running back more is so that they can get Jalen Gill on the field more. And we also saw plenty of instances last year where they had two slots on the field. So there are times when you had Demario, CJ Saunders, and either Campbell or Hill or both, and where they had, you know, three different H's on the field. And so I think you'll see more of that as well. And how do they use them, or I think they use them just as they did Paris Campbell on the sweeps. I think that's where the sweeps and the stuff over the middle, in the flats, the screens. As I said before, I see him as another Paris Campbell type. He's still got to get stronger, just as Paris Campbell did. But he's got explosion. He's fast. He's tall. He's a former running back who is used to carrying the ball. But how they use him, I just expect them to find room for him, find opportunities for him. And one of the ways would be by moving McCall to tailback at times. So that's, where are you on that, Tom? Do you agree with me on that one?
I would agree with everything you just said, and I think that's probably the depth at H is probably more proven at this point and more established than the depth at running back. So it makes sense to slot McCall over at running back and potentially give some of your other H's a chance to play. The other place that he's going to contribute, I think, this is something we talked about a couple weeks ago when someone asked us about who was going to return punts and who's going to return kicks, and you and I both had the same answer. You'd like to see Jalen Gill back there. He's like Demario McCall. If you have an opportunity to put the ball in his hands, get the ball in his hands. That is an opportunity where you know the ball is going to be coming to him if he is the one who is standing back fielding punts or standing back fielding kicks. So if he shows that he can make good choices and hang on to the football, then I think that's another opportunity to get him on the field and get him some touches.
In terms of getting somebody on the field and getting them touches, that takes us to the tight ends and Jeremy Ruckert. One of the questions from @Aaron J. Wenzel. I'm interested in watching the tight ends this spring. Do you see Jeremy Ruckert making a move, getting more playing time? And also, has there been any more talk of Rashad Berry going back to the D-line? I have not seen any tweets from Rashad Berry, any cryptic tweets about moving back to defense. Have you?
I have not. He just, all that we're basing the Rashad Berry to defensive end on is he put up an Instagram story with a bunch of pictures from when he played defensive end when he first came to Ohio State. And I don't know if he had the thinking face emoji on them or something like that, but it was, I mean, this is really well-sourced journalism when we're reporting the Rashad Berry to defensive ends, just so you understand where that's coming from. We will have a much better idea on Rashad Berry to defensive end in 2 weeks. As soon as we watch a practice, we will be able to tell you where Rashad Berry is standing, and that's going to answer all of your questions. But right now, I'm going to blame Rashad Berry for insufficient Instagramming. Really, this is on him, and maybe it's on me. Maybe he's putting it all on Snapchat because he knows that I'm not on Snapchat and I refuse to get on Snapchat. So maybe this is my fault. I don't know.
No, it's not our fault for not getting on Snapchat. It will never be our fault. It would only be the college kids, these darn kids, and their Snapchats. It'll only be their fault. It will never be my fault. It will never be your fault. They need to get off those phones and just stick to Twitter and MySpace. We don't need the chats and the Instagrams, because for one, like I said before, that's too much to follow. The Instagram for me, Twitter's fine. I'm used to it. I can't also do Instagram. I won't.
I just refreshed Friendster and nothing's on there either. So
see, that's what I need to be on, because there's not, it's not moving too fast. It's enough to keep up with.
I guess if we want to address the Jeremy Ruckert end of this question, yeah, sure. And someone asked me on Twitter today about, is this the year Jeremy Ruckert really breaks out and they throw the ball to the tight end? And I mean, sure, Linus, this is the year the Great Pumpkin arrives. Okay. I mean, how many years do you want to watch Ohio State football and sit out in the pumpkin field and wait for the Great Pumpkin to arrive and them to throw to the tight end? I mean, sure. This is going to be the year the tight end catches 900 yards worth of passes. Okay. Jeremy Ruckert will play if his blocking has improved enough for him to play. I think that they would love for him to play. I think that he would give that offense another real legitimate weapon in the passing game in a way that Luke Farrell and Rashad Berry potentially don't. Ruckert, I think, just from a pure receiving perspective, I think is the most intriguing, most explosive potential receiver in that tight end room. But he can't play if he doesn't block well, and we haven't seen him doing a whole lot of blocking. He played enough last year that you got the sense that maybe they were getting comfortable with what he could do. So, I think that there's a pretty good chance. And if you see Rashad Berry at defensive end the first week of spring ball, that's probably going to answer your question, because they're not going to move him unless they're extremely comfortable with Jeremy Ruckert being a starter. And I think I would say I expect Jeremy Ruckert to start this year, and I expect him to have a good Ohio State tight end year. But there's so many unanswered questions here. Is he going to block well enough to play? Is he going to be the clear number one starting tight end and play a lot? And how much are they going to use the tight end in this new offense? I mean, Oklahoma State used the tight end a decent amount, but Ryan Day and Kevin Wilson have not used the tight end a whole lot the last couple of years. So, and how much of that was Urban Meyer? And there's a lot of questions that we don't know the answers to yet. But sure, I'll throw my hat in the ring with Jeremy Ruckert over under 387 yards receiving this year.
Wow.
Over
under. I'm going to go under that off the top of my head, because I like Luke Farrell. I think he's still going to be starting. I wonder if they'll do like when they have both of them out there, Farrell is more the H-back, and then they can split Farrell out at times, and how they're going to use those guys. Kevin Wilson being an offensive coordinator and also the tight ends coach, he's going to try to get his guys involved. I do wonder what it will be like, and this is another question. Will they use the tight end more than just for blocking? That's from Mobuck. With the assumption, with the insinuation that that's more along the lines of what they've always been, Urban Meyer and Jim Tressel. And I do wonder if Ryan Day and Mike Yursich have more different plans for the tight ends, especially if you've got a guy like Ruckert who can get down the seam and who can take advantage of smaller defenders. I mean, that's why you go and get those. You don't go get Jeremy Ruckert to improve your running game. You do it, you go get him to improve your passing game. And so that's where you would expect to see him. I'm interested to see how they use him, the ways they use him. I think he could be maybe that guy who finally, he should be that guy that finally, say 40 catches or whatever. I'll still go under 387 this year because I think Farrell is still going to be heavily involved. Rashad Berry, we'll see what happens. Jake Hausman, he's still around. We'll see what happens there. I go back to when Tom Herman was at Rice. He had an awesome way of using the tight end. He had one tight end, James Casey. And I only remember because I think I had him on a fantasy league, and he caught like 110 passes, like 14 touchdowns, was even the Wildcat guy at times. And so when Herman came on, you're thinking, oh man, they've got Jake Stoneburner, watch what happens here. And of course, nothing of the sort happens. And did I say James Stoneburner? Jake Stoneburner?
You said Jake.
So I wonder what Ryan Day's offense looks like with the tight end. But last year when you've got those receivers, as Jim Tressel would always say, I apologize for not throwing it to Ryan Hamby when I have Anthony Gonzalez and Santonio Holmes and Ted Ginn and Roy Hall and Brian Hartline and on and on. Basically, why would I throw it to the tight end when I've got first round wide receivers all over the place? And
did you watch the Texas game?
Too soon. So I wonder if some of those receivers are gone. Now, is there more opportunity for Jeremy Ruckert? And there is, but we'll see if that's how Ryan Day's offense, Mike Yurcich's offense, if they embrace the tight end. I think there's an opportunity for it. But like you said, it's kind of up to Ruckert. He can't just be a receiver out there. And he was brought in. He got better later in the year, brought in as a second tight end to block. And he wasn't just a guy to come in and receive. He was a lot like Marcus Baugh as a redshirt freshman, where he was only a blocker, and maybe even some as a redshirt sophomore. And that was a guy who came to Ohio State really never lifting weights, never blocking, but he eventually learned. And Ruckert learned better than Baugh or maybe any recent freshman. So that's a good thing down the road, and maybe in the immediate road as well. Yeah, I think I still think it's going to be Farrell, but it might be a 1A, 1B, which is why I don't. Maybe Rashad Berry is 1C, but having a third tight end isn't always that necessary, especially in this offense.
And if he moves to defense, he'd be 1DE.
He might be but even at you've got so many defensive ends now too. I don't know if he's a man with no country, but you want to talk about big springs, with Jalen Harris, Elijah Gardner, you can go ahead and put Rashad Berry in there as well.
Yeah, he's definitely on that list because wherever he ends up, there's not a clear path to the starting job wherever he is. He will certainly be a contributor on either side of the ball, but you're one of at least three tight ends who are going to be significant contributors if you're on that side of the ball. And defensive end, they're pretty loaded at defensive end too. So there's not an easy, clear path for him, but he should be wherever he ends up. He's going to play. He just might not be the starter at either spot.
So now we move to the offensive line, which is the natural order of things. Even though coaches would say you start with the offensive line, it's not flashy enough. Plus, we wanted to talk about Justin Fields and Matthew Baldwin earlier, so we did that. But the offensive line, one of the questions from @ZippyFish wants to get our guess as to the starting five going into the spring. And for me, that's Thayer Munford at left tackle, Brandon Bowen at left guard, Josh Myers at center, Wyatt Davis at right guard, and I'm going to go with Josh Allaby at right tackle to start the spring. And then they leave it up to Nicholas Petit-Frere to maybe take the job from him. But I also think that's one of those where there isn't really a one or a two that's they're just splitting reps looking for a starter. But I feel pretty good about the other four spots, even though Brandon Bowen is kind of a guess. If he's healthy, I would expect him to be somewhere on the offensive line. And I think they like Alabi and Petit Frere enough to let them battle it out at right tackle and let Bowen find a job on the interior. Right now, the only, I can't say the only open spot, but the only open spot is left guard. We feel good about Josh Myers. He was the backup last year. Could have started from about November on, according to Greg Stadrawa. Wyatt Davis started the last couple of games last year, went through bowl practice as the starter, will go through spring likely as a starter and fall camp as a starter, and by that point, he will essentially be a returning starter. So we like him there, or at least not to speak for you, Tom. But those are my five right now, and I don't know that really at that right tackle spot whether you could call it a five or call it a six. But those are the six guys that are the best bets in my book right now.
You're probably right in that Alabi might be the starter, penciled in, air quotes, at right tackle to start the spring. I don't think he's probably the guy who starts the first game this fall. This kind of goes back to the Josh Myers versus Brady Taylor conversation that we had last summer, where you have a fifth-year starter and you have a redshirt freshman, fifth-year senior and a redshirt freshman. And if they are basically even, you might as well play the redshirt freshman because, A, the learning curve, he's probably at a point in the learning curve where he's going to improve more if he's just only been on campus for a year. And also you have the opportunity to leverage his experience for several more years in the future, as opposed to the fifth-year senior who's going to be gone at the end of the year. So I would think that if Alabi and Petit Frere are basically even coming out of fall camp, it's probably Petit Frere's job at that point. So, and there's reason to think that he is talented enough. He's had a year in the system now. He's had a year to put on some weight and work with Coach Mick and all of that. So that's probably who ends up starting at right tackle. The other four spots, yeah, I agree with you. I think Munford's a given at left tackle. Bowen is certainly a very logical person to start at left guard. He was a starter at right guard in 2017 before he broke his leg. Assuming everything has healed the way it's supposed to, he had kind of a setback last fall. Assuming everything is kind of how it's supposed to be now and he's back to 100%, he is a very logical person to start at left guard. Myers, you talked about, I think that's a pretty safe spot. Wyatt Davis, you talked about, that's, I think, a pretty safe spot at this point. So there are guys who I think could challenge, and then the $64,000 question is there a grad transfer they bring in who could potentially challenge for that left guard spot? Because they've talked to three different guys who played guard at Power 5 conference programs last year who could potentially be coming in as grad transfers this year. If any of them come in, that may kind of reopen that left guard job, maybe in summer camp. But right now, I think you got the five.
And you wrote about some updates on those guys. What did you find?
The short version is Jonah Jackson, who is the honorable mention All Big Ten transfer from Rutgers. He visited Ohio State a couple weeks ago, visited Oklahoma last weekend. The sense is he's trending towards Oklahoma. That's not real, that's not completely a done deal. He will be the first one, I think, who announces a decision. That decision is probably coming soon. It sounds like it's probably Oklahoma. RJ Proctor is the guard from Virginia. He will visit Ohio State the weekend of March 1st through 3rd. He was at Texas last weekend. He's also looking at Oklahoma and I think Florida State and Houston. So a few other schools. He's another possibility. And the third one is Parker Braun, who is a two-time All-ACC guard from Georgia Tech. He visited Florida, visited Texas, and is also he's been in communication with Ohio State. Has not set up a visit to Ohio State yet, You would think 2-time all ACC guard would be a no-brainer. He played in that Paul Johnson flexbone option offense, so I think there's some reasonable questions about how he'll do in pass blocking in the Ohio State scheme. Those are, I think, reasonable concerns. I don't know. I think that Jonah Jackson probably is the first choice right now. If they got Jonah Jackson, they would probably take him, and that would be it. And then after that, I don't know exactly how Proctor and Braun stack up. If you want to read anything into the fact that Proctor has a visit scheduled and Braun doesn't yet, you can read those tea leaves if you want to. I don't know if those are accurate or not, but those are the three guys you got to keep an eye on. Jackson, you should have a decision probably pretty soon. Proctor, I talked to Proctor. Proctor told me he wanted to have a decision kind of by the end of March, and then Braun is kind of up in the air and just kind of weighing his options right now.
But I think what people really want to know is the false start numbers for each of those guys so that fans can determine whether or not they even want them on this roster. So can you give us that information?
I have not done a study on that, and I also did not think to ask RJ Proctor about that when I talked to him. So
RJ, do you false start a lot?
Do you get booed a lot? Yeah, I didn't think to ask that, and that's on me. That's my bad. I apologize.
RJ, when I say on two, and I go hut, what do you do? Do you?
He didn't start answering questions before I finished asking them, so I guess that's probably a good indication.
Starter, right there, instant starter. One of the questions that, let's see, maybe I had here was, is there a guy outside of the five, we'll say the six guys that we talked about, who could end up winning a job? And when you look at the roster on the offensive line, you really quickly understand why they're trying to bring in some graduate transfers, because the only guy that I could say, and it's really two half guys, like, could Matthew Jones come in and win a job at left guard? Yeah, I think I would not be shocked. Gavin Cupp as well. This is his fourth year. He's been around. He's been a backup for 2 years now. So I could see maybe those guys being the most likely, but there's really no, oh yeah, I could definitely see him. That's why I think maybe a guy like Josh Allaby as your number 6 guy or Brandon Bowen as your number 6 guy gives you a deeper offensive line, because they can do, like, Allaby can play either tackle spot. Bowen can play pretty much anywhere. But if he's your left guard, then, which I think will be fine, he can move around after that. But when you try to figure out, Tom, when you're looking at these names, like who else could start, you can understand why they're trying to bring other guys in.
Yeah, Matthew Jones is really the only one that I think is a real serious contender to potentially take that left guard job. You could maybe see Harry Miller, probably. I mean, that's a very tough thing for a true freshman to come in and win a starting job on the offensive line, especially from day one. Maybe that happens kind of mid-season, potentially, maybe. But you go back, it's Michael Jordan did that as a guard in 2016, and before that it was Orlando Pace. So that's not that's a pretty elite company. And there are guys on this roster that have come in with real serious recruiting bona fides. Harry Miller is considered one of the best offensive linemen. He's a 5-star center. You do not see very many 5-star centers. So that should give you a sense for how special he could be down the road. But the line it's a lot like wide receiver. It's a hard place to project guys to make a meaningful contribution as a true freshman. A year from now, absolutely, I think he's in that conversation for whatever spot is open. But that's a tough thing to ask a true freshman to come in and do, especially without having enrolled early.
I think the last 5-star center the Buckeyes signed would have been Mike Brewster in 2008, and I believe he probably started some in 2008, didn't he? Do you remember offhand?
I do not remember offhand. That line, that was that Brew Crew class with him and Mike Adams and JB Shugarts and who else was in that line? I think they had 5 offensive linemen in that class.
Well, they had one guy end up going to West Virginia.
Okay. Yeah, it was, I can look this up in a minute, but it was, I don't remember if he started as a true freshman, but he came in and contributed pretty early if it wasn't his freshman year.
Yeah, I'm looking it up. Go ahead and vamp, Tom.
Hello, my baby. Hello, my honey. This is probably worth revisiting just in terms of spring expectations of these true freshmen who are in early. The easiest place in general to get on the field as a true freshman and make a contribution or potentially start as a true freshman is running back. Because basically there are fewer, it's a less complicated position in a lot of ways. And if you can block enough to pick up a blitz and you're fast enough and you can hit the right hole, you can start. You saw J.K. Dobbins start from day one in 2017 as a true freshman when Mike Weber went down. That's not something you necessarily want to do, but you go back in history, when you think of true freshmen, they've contributed immediately game one. Got Maurice Claret. Archie Griffin, I don't think was game one, but he was a major impact player at running back as a true freshman. That's a spot that's relatively easy to get on the field and contribute early. Wide receiver and offensive line are typically some of the most difficult. Defensive back is generally pretty difficult. On the defense, the easiest place to potentially get on the field as a true freshman is just that kind of pass rushing defensive end. You've seen Larry Johnson work those guys in a decent amount. I mean, Tyreek Smith was a true freshman last year, pass rushing defensive end. They put him in that Rushman package. He was a contributor. The Boses both played as true freshmen.
I mean, he was in the Rushman package from the get-go, Tyreek Smith was, which was surprising.
Yeah, and that's a place where you don't have a lot of keys you have to read. You don't have to, you don't have a lot of assignments. There's not a lot of complicated, switches or anything like that. It is, see that guy with the football? Go get him. And so that's something you can just kind of throw someone on the field and let that athletic ability take over. So if you're looking at people who could be immediate contributors from this freshman class, guys who are in early this fall, potentially Marcus Crowley. I mean, he's got some depth chart issues ahead of him where there's a lot of other talented running backs on that team. But Marcus Crowley and defensive ends, I mean, Noah Potter is one, but I think Zach Harrison is probably the person that you could see make a kind of day one impact in that Rushman package like Tyreek Smith did. There's at least an opportunity and a reasonable expectation that he could do that.
Hot take alert. Yeah. Too long, actually. We're going to have to cut most of that. I'll give you a hot take right now for next week. Noah Potter will have more sacks this year than Zach Harrison. So just write that down, people.
Somebody write that down and tweet it to me and say, Tom, fave this tweet so you can remember this, so we can revisit this if Gerd is wrong at the end of the season. Otherwise, don't revisit this at the end of the season. Don't tag Gerd, just tag me.
Otherwise,
just on the off chance that he's tweet. Right. Yes, exactly. This tweet will self-destruct if Gerd is right.
Mike Brewster is listed as the starter in 2008. I don't think it was game one, but he moved Jim Cordell from center to left guard and then ended up being a 4-year starter. So, if history is any indication, and as we know, it generally isn't when we're only talking about one other person. So I don't expect Harry Miller to come in and start at center. Maybe he works his way. Of course, the difficult part there is he's not in this spring and doesn't have that same advantage that Michael Jordan had for sure in 2016 or whatever that was. Yeah, 16. So that is the offensive line. I think we've covered it and talked about it and also covered it, which brings us now, Tom, I believe, to listener questions. Is that correct?
Yes, the listener questions we have not already covered because we love you so much. We've just made your questions basically the whole show, so you're welcome. First one from @ChipMinnick. You've discussed the lack of intensity from that team up north on previous podcasts. Do you have any concerns that Greg Mattison or Al Washington may not approach the game with the appropriate intensity that OSU fans are expecting?
I think this is hard to say, but I think it is okay to have concerns, but I also don't think it's going to be an issue. However, Tom, it's still shocking that I can't say that Greg Mattison was taken aback. I expect things to be just fine, because if they can get freshmen hitting Michigan pretty quickly and to understand what that game means, then obviously the coaches will fall in line, because it's not just Madison and Al Washington who have some semblance of an idea of what the rivalry is. There's the other coaches, Jeff Hafley, Matt Barnes, Mike Yursich, who you're going to have to get them accustomed to as well. However, it might be easier to get those guys up to speed because they have no preconceived notion. So whatever you tell them, they're going to believe. When you try to tell Greg Mattison, Al Washington, like, yeah, this is a very important thing, they're like, why? When? Says who? And so they have to unlearn what they have learned, as Yoda would say. And basically, I think Ryan Day is going to have to break these guys down as if they've joined the military. And he's going to have to crush them into powder and maybe throw some eggs in there and some water. I don't know how you make stuff or bake stuff, but then you stir them back up, you throw them in the oven, 450 for, the next 10 months. And then they'll be ready. But I think it's right to be concerned, but I don't think it's a worry. And I'm not contradicting myself there.
I'm just picturing, as you're talking, have you seen the movie A Clockwork Orange, where they sit him in a chair and
Yes.
tie him down and pry his eyes open, just making Greg Mattison just watch the Desmond Howard Heisman pose and the Charles Woodson punt return and intercut with like nuclear bombs exploding. And I think that they can probably deprogram him sufficiently in the next 9 months that it shouldn't be a major concern. Al Washington's dad played linebacker at Ohio State, was a pretty good player for kind of the beginning of I think he might have been late Woody and the first couple of years of the Earl Bruce era. When Al Washington went to Michigan, I don't remember if I've read this or if this is a story he told during his early press conferences, but the first time his dad went to Michigan, it must have been last year for the spring game or something like that, when his son is the linebackers coach at Michigan, I think he had an Ohio State shirt on under his coat or something during the spring game at Michigan. So there's not much question that if Al Washington has any questions and is nervous about asking Ryan Day about the rivalry, Al Washington can call his dad and it'll be fine. I don't think there's any reason to be worried about Al Washington.
And I think at that press conference, one of the things that Alvin Washington told his son was that there's just too much yellow. He couldn't take it. There's too much yellow there. So he appreciated that his son had a good job at a good school, but he didn't like being there because, well, I mean, come on, we know why. But yeah, I think they'll be okay. Ryan Day is a molder of men and a coacher of coaches, and he will get them properly psychologically enhanced for the game.
All right, next one from @VanGo0. Has anything been leaking out regarding the winter conditioning of the early enrollees? Has anyone really been improving?
I really haven't heard much it's been, you see clips and stuff on Twitter. I still go back to Ryan Day on signing day talking about already seeing Zach Harrison make strides. You got Ronnie Hickman, who can't really do much right now. But I think Garrett Wilson, I think that was him punching the Michigan bag on Twitter. So you get to see a little bit here and there of the young guys, but really this time of year, they're going to say everybody's doing well and everybody's looking good. It's a new process for a lot of guys, but we like what we're seeing. But yeah, I haven't heard, Tom, have you heard much coming out
there hasn't been a whole lot leaking out yet. And this is a very closed portion of the season. Like, it's not, you don't even kind of get the normal practice leaks because there are fewer people around. It's just basically just the players and kind of strength staff at this point of year. So yeah, I have not heard a whole lot, but just in general, going through spring, you're not going to hear a lot probably about specific guys. There is sort of a way that coaches talk about freshmen, and they're coming along, they're learning. It's like drinking from a fire hose. I mean, there's a lot of stuff that you hear about just about everyone during their true freshman spring, and you're going to have to kind of wait and see. There is a lot of look at what they're doing and don't listen to what they're saying with this stuff. When you see who is getting the reps with the ones and the twos and who is just kind of standing on the side and hands on hips and watching, that's going to be a better indication of who's really kind of impressing this spring than anything we hear from anyone talking about guys. Every once in a while they'll talk about someone and they're talking about someone in a way that they don't talk about people normally, but by and large you kind of get one sort of stock answer about, they're working hard, they're learning, they're asking all the right questions, but you got to kind of watch rather than listen to what they say. Next one from Crabapple Buck. Who is the Bam Childress of 2019?
One of my problems that I have with this, and Bam Childress, if you're not familiar with the meme, basically, it was a meme before a meme where Bam had a good spring game or two early in his career, or at some point in his career, but really never materialized in the regular season. And yet, from that one spring game, people had so many expectations for him and it never materialized. So whenever you see somebody with a big spring game, they're kind of not cursed, but you maybe dismiss it and chalk it up to the Bam Childress of spring. But, Mike Thomas has had a good spring game. He turned out all right. There are other examples as well. Joe Burrow, even though he did turn out all right for Ohio State, but there is still, like DeMario McCall had a huge spring game last year and really did nothing until towards the end of the season. So when I think of who might that be, you got to go to like a young guy, maybe like, and the first guy I go to is Garrett Wilson, because I think there may not be a lot of snaps, but then also if the only guy in front of him is maybe Cameron Babb, then he's got an opportunity. But I think he's a guy that could really flash in a game, maybe even Cameron Babb if he could play, but one of those guys where, maybe they have 6 catches for 120 yards and a couple of touchdowns, but then at the end of the season they have 14 total catches in the regular season, and maybe just not that they didn't live up to the hype, but they created some maybe unrealistic expectations for themselves.
If you are expecting a true freshman to do huge things as a wide receiver and they don't live up to the hype, that's a you problem and not a them problem. That is an expectation issue and not a performance issue. The guy who I have here is someone we've talked about earlier, Jalen Gill, because he's the kind of guy who could get loose. You break off a long touchdown, you have one of those shimmy and shake and make someone miss. Like those are the plays that people remember. And he is in a spot where, even more so than Garrett Wilson, it's going to be hard for him to get too many carries, to get on the field too much this fall. So he could have a very good spring and still be 4th on the depth chart at H. And, at that point, you're playing a lot of fourth quarters against Rutgers and not getting a chance to really show what you can do in big moments and not piling up big stats. So I think he's another possibility there.
That's a good answer.
A lot like Garrett. A lot like Garrett Wilson. And it's not that he's going to never do anything in his career. He, I think, is poised to do some big things, but it might be another year before you see him really kind of break out.
Although I will say, Tom, that if anybody is expecting Ohio State players to just, or anybody to just run through the Ohio State defense this year, be it in spring or whenever, and for big plays and what have you, you guys are going to be sorely mistaken, my friends. Okay? Mark that one down. There's another hot take for you for defense next week. Thank you.
Maybe you should watch the Oklahoma spring game if you want to see that. Did the Patriots have a spring game? I don't know. I don't watch much of the NFL. Next one from David's son. Balance of run versus pass and of the run mix between the quarterback and the running back. Just what basically predict what the offense is going to look like this year.
Yeah, Tom, I was looking at just a couple of minutes ago, looking at the number of runs versus the pass last year. Ohio State ran the ball 570 times and threw it 561 times. So it's a difference of 9. The year before, they ran it 149 times more than they threw it. In 2016, they ran it 174 more times than they threw it. Now, 2015, here you go. 242 more rushes than passes, and that was when they had 2 quarterbacks. So you're seeing this gradual thing where you're moving more towards the passing game. And Tom, in college football, in any kind of football, if you were actually like 50-50, that's more like 60-40 throwing the ball. It's like it's so skewed to actually be 50-50 at Ohio State. You look like you're a passing team. And so you've got this balanced offense, and balance doesn't always mean 50-50, as Urban Meyer would say. It's being able to do whatever you want, whenever you want. That's what real balance is. Being able to run it when you want, being able to throw it when you want. I think they will want to get back to being able to run it. It's just when they were as ineffective as they were last year, now you've got to throw it more. But Tom, the thing is, they'll be more effective throwing it this year, or running it, which means there will be fewer runs, maybe, and fewer passes, but maybe the 50-50-ish stays. There's going to be longer possessions as well if you're running the ball better. I think the 50-50 is pretty close to what I am expecting next year, although I would still expect 55-45 running the ball, just because, you still have to, when you're up by 3 touchdowns in the fourth quarter, why are you going to be throwing the ball around? You're going to try to run the clock out. Maybe that's one of the reasons why there were fewer runs last year, or the skew was lesser, is because there were so many non-blowouts, and that's why we didn't get to see Matthew Baldwin or Tate Martell. And that's also one of the reasons why you threw the ball so much, because you had Dwayne Haskins. You had to keep scoring. So you would think, Tom, with a better defense, you get back to 55-45 at least, right?
Probably something like that. The ultimate numbers may also depend on who's playing quarterback, because if it's Justin Fields playing quarterback, you may see a little bit more of the JT Barrett style offense, where you've got the quarterback run and you're leaning on the run game a little more, and it's kind of that true dual threat. And if it's Matthew Baldwin, it's more of the Dwayne Haskins style throwing it more offense. So that could change the numbers as well. As far as the second part of the question, the run mix between the quarterback and the running back, obviously it's going to be a lot more quarterback if it's Justin Fields than if it's Matthew Baldwin. If it's Matthew Baldwin, it's probably 90-10 running backs to quarterbacks, or something in that neighborhood. And if it's Fields, it's probably more like with Barrett, it's half the time it was like 50-50, it seemed like. And you're not going to be there, but it 70-30, something like that with running backs to quarterbacks, something in that neighborhood. So a lot of this is going to depend on which guy wins that starting quarterback job.
I was trying to figure in my head how many times a game would Justin Fields carry the ball, and I didn't really want to get into it in a spring preview thing, but JT Barrett, I think, averaged maybe 11.8 rushing attempts a game. Dwayne Haskins last year was at 5.6, and that's with a third of those being sacks. So I'm thinking Justin Fields would be maybe in the middle there, like 9 rushing attempts per game, something like that. I think that would be a good number for him, because his athleticism, you have to use it. And as Urban Meyer has said for years and years, his defenses hate playing against quarterbacks who can run because that's one more thing you have to worry about. So, why not utilize that aspect of him and of Matthew Baldwin if he's the guy? It's a pain for defenses to have to worry about it. So why make their jobs less of a pain? So yeah, I think you use every bit of your offense, and that includes your quarterback's legs. This last question we've pretty much answered throughout the whole show, I think.
Yeah, pretty much. We'll give a shout out at NSR0001. During Rose Bowl week, you mentioned talking to players about who are some of the names of players we should be watch for in the future. Could you expand on that this week and next?
Yes, we can. And we have.
We have. I mean, the general formula is talented guys entering their second year or third year with an open spot in front of them are generally the kind of guys who are going to be people who have an opportunity to really kind of take a leap. So, I mean, a lot of names you've already heard. Yeah, a lot of names you've already heard tonight. Master Teague, Chris Olave, Garrett Wilson, Nicholas Petit-Frere, Wyatt Davis. I guess we'll just do the offense today and we'll save the defense for next week.
Yeah, and defense next week will be like a bunch of guys who are behind Tough Borland. So you have that to look forward to. That is going to do it for this show. Thank you all for listening. We truly appreciate it. We ask that you continue to rate and review the show on iTunes or whatever your listening platform is. Tom, any other announcements? I will let you know, I did have a Buckeye fan ask for one of my Michigan programs from 1995. So I am down to, after I get this one mailed out, I will be down to 3. So if any Buckeye fans out there want one of these collector's editions from Ohio State's near win in Ann Arbor in 1995, 31-23 Michigan, where Ohio State's defense was able to hold Michigan's running game, I believe, under 400 yards. These are collector's editions, provided you are a collector of things like an Iron Maiden or other torture devices from the Middle Ages, things of that nature. If you are a sick son of a gun and would like one of these, shoot me a DM. Also, if you want to rate and review and shoot us a DM about that and a screenshot, I can get you one of these. Now, Tom's got stuff like Rose Bowl programs. I might have maybe a program from the Michigan game this year. I don't remember, but I've also got a Rose Bowl program still. Things of that nature, just freebies that we've collected over the last year that we would be more than happy to send out to anybody. Not anybody, but you screenshot us, we'll put you in a hat and pull out your name, things like that, right, Tom?
Yep. And also, if you go on your spouse's phone or your roommate's phone and subscribe to the podcast, that's also appreciated. We just anything you can do to help get the word out, we greatly appreciate that. I am a little concerned about the person that wanted the 1995 Michigan program. You just were telling that story, and just the Terrell Pryor quote about Kirk Herbstreit popped into my head. So I don't know. I don't know about that person.
Hey, what we do know is they listen to the show. They like the show. So I'm not going to speak badly.
So now there's two things wrong with them.
I'm not going to lick a gift horse in the mouth. Somebody wants a program, I'm going to send it to them. And really, no questions asked. It's like, if you steal my car, just return it. Preferably with the doors unlocked. I just need my car back, And now we've gone full circle.
Now we're done with the show.
All right. Good night, everybody. We will talk to you next week.
Well, she threw away the motel key. I wish it never meant nothing to me. Say you will, now say you will. Oh yeah. Say you will, now say you will. If you tell me that tomorrow's alright, we could steal a car and leave